tonight we will have the honor, the privilege, the great merit of hearing some personal recollections. This program tonight is being done because there was actually a lot of requests after I did the conversations with my mother. That was a big hit. We literally had hundreds and hundreds of people that viewed it. I got tons of comments and feedback. So many people asked they wanted to hear from you.
Okay.
And
I did not change his diapers. Can't tell you share such stories because it wouldn't be true.
So I told Chana that I'm worried. My father goes on camera. You never know what he'll say. He could be dangerous. He could be dangerous. So we're taking some risks tonight, but it's okay. I'm all with love.
Good.
We could handle it. But we're going to focus, although my father has really a lot to share on so many topics, and maybe we'll do another time on other topics. Tonight, being that it's the yard site of the Rebbe, we're going to focus primarily on how the Rebbe impacted the life of my father, which in turn impacted me, which in turn impacted all of you that are watching. But that's already going a few steps beyond what we want to focus on tonight. So we're going to start, first of all, L'chaim. It's not only to have my father sitting next to me. It's much more Hamish and warm than just doing it over 2 Zooms. We are going to start with asking you a question. Before we even get to the personal stuff and how the Rebbe impacted you and growing up with the Rebbe and how you ended up opening the Chabad in Coral Springs, what does today mean to you? Today being the yard site, the 26th yard site of the Rebbe, what does that mean to you? And then we'll go into the history and the stories.
Okay. I want you to imagine 2 young people meet, go out, fall in love, and decide to get married. Romantic story. I want you to imagine that they are the perfect couple. They're actually compatible. They actually like each other. Not only they love each other, they like each other. I want you to imagine their first anniversary. It's romantic. They've gone away. Maybe they're holding a baby. Maybe she's pregnant. And they love each other. And it's a beautiful anniversary. I want you to now to go 5 years ahead. I want you to go 10 years ahead. I want you to imagine the 10th anniversary. I want you to imagine that they are doing everything they can to invest in themselves and in their marriage and in their relationship. They go away, they make time for each other, they like each other even more, they love each other's jokes, they think they're funny, she thinks she's beautiful, she thinks he's handsome, charming, debonair. I want you to imagine their 20th anniversary. I want you to imagine their 30th anniversary. The kids have moved out. I want you to imagine they have more time for each other. Less time really at work and more time for each other. And they are just growing deeper and deeper and deeper. Their love is more mature. He sees things in her that he didn't appreciate 25 years ago. Not only because he wasn't mature, she actually didn't display them 25 years ago. Because as she has grown older, she has matured and she has become even a better human being than she was when she was busy with her kids. I want you to imagine it's true on both sides. I want you to imagine they are married 50 years. I want you to imagine their grandchildren come to their home just to see Bubby and Zaidi look at each other as if they are sharing a deep secret that no one else understands. And everyone jealous of their love. Can you imagine? What is Gimel Tammuz? The first Gimel Tammuz, the 10th Gimel Tammuz, the 26th Gimel Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz is the day you fall in love all over again with your Rebbe. You remind yourself why you fell in love. And as you see more things about your Rebbe, you want to give your Rebbe more of you. It's deeper, it's more meaningful. And just as you have other things in your life when you are married 10 years and 20 years, but less things in your life just for each other as you grow older together, the Rebbe just becomes a more powerful presence in your life, parenthetically. Chassidim often say that when King Solomon wanted to describe the love between God and the Jewish people, he uses the metaphor of marriage. Had he been a Rebbe, had he had Chassidim, he would have talked about the love of a Rebbe and a Chassid as it grows deeper and deeper and deeper. Gimel Tammuz is the day you fall in love again.
Beautiful.
And it's true, not just beautiful.
Okay, so you're falling in love with the Rebbe deeper and deeper every year. And obviously, a yard set is a day when you think and you focus and you meditate on that idea of connecting to the Rebbe, as we discussed last night in our program last night. So probably nobody watching, myself for sure not, grew up with the Rebbe the way you did. So first let's start, before I even go to being a yeshiva student in 770, living with the Rebbe as a kid growing up. When was the first time you saw the Rebbe?
So first of all, I didn't grow up in Crown Heights. I didn't grow up with the Rebbe. I grew up in Montreal. My father's mother lived between New York and Montreal. When my aunt, my dad's baby sister, got sick, we would go very, very often to New York. And so I had gone into the Rebbe as a child with my family, probably once a year growing up, probably from the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And it was always a big part of going to New York. That one time that we would go into the Yechidus, but I was not the center of attention, and I was not the focus of what was going on.
All the kids went into the Yechidus every year?
Most of us went in, as my older brothers not only went into the Rebbe, my older brothers went into the Rebbetzin as well.
Just explain, what does it mean going into Yechidus? So many of us don't even know what that even means.
So, on a practical level, my father had a very close relationship with the Rebbe because of the Rebbe's mother, the Rebbetzin Chaya, Chana, and the Rebbetzin Chana and my father knew each other from Europe, from the DP camps, and my father kept up that connection. Whenever he went to New York, he went in with my brothers, not only to the Rebbe, but to the Rebbe's mother. Obviously, that I was not part of that. I was alive when I was born before she passed away. But I was a baby. I was an infant. I was a little toddler. My older brother Shlomi remembers very well going in. As I grew up, going in, it went from once a year to once every 2 years because it was just getting harder just to get a family yechidus. I probably remember 3 distinct times going into the Rebbe. And what that meant was that for me as a child, it meant staying up late at night.
What time was a private meeting?
I don't know. It would just be guess. It was very late at night. It was probably something between 11 and 1 or 11 and 2 in the morning. And we went in, and we were introduced to the Rebbe in his private room. At one point, I remember the Rebbe giving my father a bracha. Maybe it happened all the times, I don't know. But at one time I remember my father definitely lining us up like little puppets, and we got a bracha from the Rebbe.
Individual bracha for each
individual kid. Bracha that I remember once. But you went in because you wanted to have a soul meeting or a meeting of souls. And my father would ask the Rebbe for direction in his life. And again, I was a kid. It was kind of beyond my understanding. That changed after I was 12 years old, before my 13th birthday. And at the time in Chabad history, before your bar mitzvah, you were able to go into the Rebbe. And that really begins my personal relationship.
Going to the Rebbe on your own, not with your parents?
With my father.
Okay.
I went with my father.
For your bar mitzvah?
For my bar mitzvah. And here's, by the way...
I'm going to interrupt. I'm curious, sure. I'm curious for my own sake, just to know, we're discussing, even though I'm very familiar with how Yechidus worked in general. When you went in with your father and your family, how long was the meeting?
I'm about to tell you.
Oh, okay.
It was forever.
To you, it felt like forever.
It's still going on in my head. So I'm going to just share that with you. I was in 7th grade at the time. My teacher was a fellow called Rabbi Eisenbach. And I was going in, and I told all my friends that I'm going in, and everybody was so happy for me. And I was one of the first ones to have a bar mitzvah in my class. So therefore, I was like one of the first kids to go in for a private audience.
What year is this?
1973.
And what year did Yechidus stop?
That kind of Yechidus stopped in 75. So,
okay.
So, I had gone to New York, as I said, many, many times before for family visits, to visit with my grandmother, to visit with my cousins. We drove in very, very often. That was the most normal way we went in. There were times we took sleeper trains, which means, you went overnight and you slept. And as a kid, sometimes I was part of the yeshiva as a kid because I won a prize or because I was just, I had done something and I was able to go in with the yeshiva for a Yud Shvat or Yud Tes Kislev. So I had either gone in by train or by car or by bus.
Is it normal to drive from Montreal to New York? Not from
Very
Chabad.
often.
For Chabad
Oh, I have
families.
no idea. I have no idea.
Like in those days, taking a road trip of 6-7 hours.
I have no idea.
Okay. So you got in the car, drove to Montreal,
Right.
from Montreal
This
to New
time
York.
we went by plane.
Okay.
And it was the first time we had gone by plane. And you know my father very well. My father is not ostentatious in the least. We arrived and a limousine pulls up. And I remember I was a very tall, gangly kid. You might know my son. And I was stretching out my foot and I couldn't reach the front seat. That's how big it was. Okay, I was 13 years old at the time, becoming 13 years old. And I said to my father, because it was so unlike my father, I said, how come we are going in a limousine? It just didn't seem like my father would splurge. Not because my father's cheap, but my father just doesn't spend money unnecessarily. And my father said, when you're going to the Rebbe, you have to act. He didn't say the words Evet Melech Melech, which would mean that the servant of a king should act kingly. He never said those words, but I understood from the conversation, I don't remember the exact words, is we're going to see the Rebbe. We're on a very different mission. We have to, appear differently. And that got me really nervous. I was really, really nervous. And I remember standing in my grandmother's bathroom, brushing my teeth like 1,000 times, as if the Rebbe was going to smell my bad breath or something. I was really, really nervous. I remember we had a much later appointment than usual. I remember saying Tehillim in my grandmother's apartment, walking to 770, my father greeting all of his friends and all of his peers. And I was left alone. I didn't know what to do. I was looking around. I didn't know anybody because I didn't grow up in New York. I remember waiting a long time. And then our turn was coming closer and my father was getting, all ready to go. And I had spoken to my two older brothers about going into Yechidus. And they told me, don't worry, the Rebbe's not going to ask. My
father's a third of four boys.
Right. So they told me that you're not going to ask any questions. The Rebbe's going to give you a personal bracha. But he's not going to ask you a question. Okay, so we go in, and my father hands the Rebbe a note. And it was the first time that I handed the Rebbe a note.
Your own note?
My own note. That my father told me what to write, because I didn't know what to write. And I remember what I wrote. I handed my father a note. But what I did not hand in, and what I did not tell my father, was that my teacher, Rabbi Eisenbach, who had heard that I was going in next week, said to me, my brother in Israel is sick. Here's his name. Would you ask the Rebbe for a bracha? And I felt like such a knacker. If you don't know the word knacker is, look it up in your Yiddish dictionary. Like such a macher and such an important big shot, because now I was going to ask not only a bracha for myself, I'm going to ask for a bracha for my teacher's brother in Eretz Yisrael. And he wrote down the name, and I, like a mantra, I was like memorizing the name over and over and over and over and over again. And so I that was not even in my notes. I was going to ask that. I was going to like a big shot and say, Rebbe, my teacher gave me a job and a mission. And so he handed in the note, and the Rebbe asked me, what's the date of my bar mitzvah? And I didn't understand. I don't know anything. I said, it's Shabbos. So they said, no, what's the date in the month? And because I got the first question wrong.
You're flustered.
I was flustered, to say the least.
Yeah.
So I said to the Rebbe, Yud Gimel, Kislev. And the Rebbe asked me, so it was on a Friday, that day. So the Rebbe asked me, do you give tzedakah every single day when you daven? And I did. I gave a nickel, whatever it was. And it wasn't my money. My mother had gave me money. And so the Rebbe said, are you going to be able to give my bar mitzvah was Shabbos, not Friday. So the Rebbe said, are you going to be able to give tzedakah on your bar mitzvah? And I said, yes. The Rebbe said, on Shabbos? So I'm really, this is really not going well. So then the Rebbe gave me a suggestion, which I've done every single year, is that when Friday, you always should give twice tzedakah. One for Friday, one for Shabbos, and for your birthday, you should give once for Friday, once for Shabbos, once for your birthday. And I've had my birthday
triple the amount,
right? Triple the amount. And I was really, really flustered. And then the Rebbe said, "Did you learn the Hasidic discourse?" And what that means is that every single child becoming bar mitzvah learns and memorizes and recites by heart a Hasidic discourse. And of course, I learned it. I didn't understand a word of it because we really don't understand anything when we're 13 years old. And I said yes. And then the Rebbe asked me a question, not a question on the mimer. He asked me the mimer's question, which talks about why when you put on tefillin, ki'ilu, it's as if you learn Torah an entire day. And that's the Maimer's question. What's so special about the value of putting on tefillin? And I didn't know.
You know the answer.
No, I didn't know the answer. No, I knew the words. I could repeat the words, but I didn't know. So I started like trying to funfa. Funfa means like I'm da, 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 and I was saying some words, and it was obvious that I didn't know. And I remember thinking to myself, my father must be thinking, "Oh God, what a dope of a kid I have over here." Anyways, so I said something, and I have no idea what I said, but I realized as I was saying that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And the Rebbe started to speak, so I shut up. And I realized that Rebbe was like giving a closing bracha to me and to my father. And I was like just standing there thinking I messed up. And I wasn't sobbing, but I started to sniffle. I was crying a little. And my father was looking at me, and I remember my father like taking me from the back, like start walking backwards. And then I remembered, of course, I got to ask. So I said to the Rebbe, my teacher's brother is sick, and he asked me to ask the Rebbe for a bracha. And the Rebbe said, what's his full Hebrew name? Was his name in Yiddish, obviously. And even though I had been practicing like 1,000 times, but because of everything that happened, it went out the window. And I don't know what to say because I couldn't remember anything. Not a first name, not a mother's name, nothing. It was zero, blank. And I looked at my father. My father was like, "What do you want from me? You didn't tell me this." And I didn't know what to do. And I said to the Rebbe, the only thing that was in my head, and that is the one from Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Eisenbach family is one of these very large families with like 100 cousins in 100 different branches. It's an old Jerusalem family. And I just said the one from the Eretz Yisrael, which obviously doesn't narrow it down much. And then the Rebbe said to me,
they're saying the Denver from Florida.
Denver's from worse even.
I know, yes.
Because we've only been here 2 generations. They've been here like 8 generations.
Yes.
And the Rebbe said to me in Yiddish, Zogem az ich kenem, which means tell him that I know him. And I didn't appreciate the answer. It's like you don't appreciate your spouse when you get married and you only begin to see. But that really was amazing to me because that is the relationship that I want to have, that I know I have, that the Rebbe knows who I am. He knows where I am, what I'm doing. And I worry, am I giving the Rebbe the joy and the nachas that he deserves in our relationship? And, there are most conversations in your life and most days in your life go by in a blur. There are very few things you remember, maybe a promise you made. You may or may not remember. Very few things you remember. That day and that conversation is neither of the two. It's not a day that I remember. It's a day that I didn't know it at the time, would define my life. It really defines my life. When I say the Rebbe, and I say Zogem az ich kenem, and I think about that conversation, I'm not going to say every single day, but very often, 10 times on Gimel Tammuz. You can't fool your Rebbe. You can fool your wife some of the time. You can tell your wife, I'm really working hard, and instead you're not. But you can't fool the Rebbe. You can be 1,300 miles away. You can be 13,000 miles away. You just can't fool your Rebbe. And that's Gimel Tammuz. For me, it's reliving the moments I spent with the Rebbe. There are other times I had private audiences with the Rebbe, twice when I was a bacher.
Okay, so in a sec. So that's before your bar mitzvah. So you're Chaim. Okay, so that's before your bar mitzvah, turning 13, and the opportunity to have your own, so to say, yechidus with the Rebbe. Right. I'm going to assume that you had for your birthday every year after, or for the next 2 years. You didn't have. You were in 770.
The next time I had a yechidus with the Rebbe, I was 16 years old, and then I kind of stopped. Last time I was one of the last guys that had. I had a yechidus twice later as part of a small group of 10 bachrim that went out on shlichus. I had that twice in my life.
So I want to ask you about,
And then I was with a group of couples who had a private audience with the Rebbe before their marriage. Correct.
Okay, so let's go one step at a time. So high school you did in Montreal. And for those that are watching one about Chabad in Coral Springs, we're going to get there soon. But we're going to get the the background. So you went to yeshiva.
By the way, all of this took place 6
Cameras
years ago.
So
I'm really 28 years old yet.
So high school you were in Montreal, and then you
Correct.
went to 770 to Crown Heights to go learn by the Rebbe.
No.
Where did you go out for?
I went to a little town called Florida.
Oh,
I was
okay.
a student in Miami Beach. Right.
So did you ever spend time as a yeshiva student in 770? You did.
I did
No.
for several years.
So describe what it's like being a yeshiva student in
It's heaven.
770
It's heaven.
with the Rebbe, with the whole energy of Crown Heights, of, what was it like growing up? Because I know that your parents didn't have a dream of you becoming a rabbi.
No kidding.
My grandparents wanted to see a doctor,
does
a lawyer.
Does everyone in the audience know the story about the couple that want?
There's a big audience. We have like over 30 people on Facebook and like 50 people here.
Does your audience know the story about the family who didn't know what's going to be with their kids, and they really wanted to find out, and so they came to this child therapist, and he says, "Yeah, put on the kitchen table the bottle of vodka, put on the kitchen table the Gemara, the Talmud, and put on the kitchen table the $100 bill. If he takes the bottle, he'll be a drunk. If he takes the Gemara, the Talmud, he'll be a scholar. And if he takes the $100 bill, he'll be a businessman." So they did it. They woke up in the middle of the night, and he groggily walks into the kitchen, and he takes the bottle and says, "Oh, he's going to be a drunk." Right? And then he grabs the Talmud. "Oh, at least he'll be a scholar." Right?
Yeah.
And then he grabbed the $100 bill. You notice he didn't pull out a
My
$100 bill.
My wallet's upstairs.
Yeah, likely story.
Yeah.
And they were so confused because he was doing such disparate things. He was going into business. He was going to be a scholar. He was going to, to say l'chaim and fabring. So they came back to the therapist. "So what's it going to be?" He said, "A Chabad Rabbi, a Chabad Shliach." And
yes.
And by the way, I just want to just jump into something about Shluchim. Shluchim were the new, supposed to be spiritual and savvy and approachable faces of Judaism, and that's what the Rebbe wanted. He didn't pick only scholars or only businessmen or only people who know how to rank. He really picked people who were going to be the face of a new kind of Jew, a happy Jew, an exciting Jew, an excited Jew, an inspired Jew, an inspiring Jew, someone who people would gravitate to, and I think that's really the secret of Chabad.
Okay, beautiful. And part of that, part of the process of making you to that excited, happy, loving Jew,
right,
was the time you spent in 770.
Certainly.
At the Fabringans of the Rebbe, under the teachers and the whole yeshiva environment there. So describe, because I'm sure almost nobody watching knows what it was like to be growing up as a 20-year-old in New York in 770 in Crown Heights. What was that like?
As I said before, it was heaven. Imagine a world where it's not like college, by the way. Imagine a world like college, there's no bills, no worries, all your friends, all on the same page. You live in a society where everybody is encouraging you to do one thing, but unlike college, there's not a million distractions. You're not worried about a future. You're really not worried about the future. You're living in the moment. And if you ever see a 4-year-old kid, jumping in a puddle and giving no thought to the fact that he's getting wet, or he's no fact to the fact that he's going to have to take a bath, and no attention to what's going to be in 5 minutes from now, and it's lightning, and he's living in the moment. Unlike a college student, which does have some worries about the future, when you are involved in that kind of world, and the Rebbe was there.
It's a great example, by the way.
Thank you. You're just living the moment, and the world has stopped. And I have to tell you that when you went out into the real world, so to speak, it looked strange to you. It looked strange to you. So I used to go on Fridays.
You were molded in
right. The world looked strange, and people looked strange. You went in the world, and people were crass. People talked about, and unfortunately, rubbed off on me. So it like, why are you spending your time worried about such pettiness? It's not like you didn't listen to radio because it was forbidden, or you didn't watch TV because it was forbidden, or you didn't go to movies because it was forbidden, because you had so many more better things to do. And your whole life, your whole mindset was another glimpse of the Rebbe, another Farbrengen, another insight, and learning another page of Chassidus, just like a vacuum cleaner, just sucking it all in. And it was nirvana. to the point of I found a group of friends, and every Thursday night, like it's now Thursday night, we made a pact amongst ourselves that we would verbring every single Thursday night, come hell or high water, and we verbringed every Thursday night. And my last week as a yeshiva student in 770, I was getting married, and it was my last Thursday before marriage, BC, before chasana.
For chasna, for the chuppah, yeah.
Before the chuppah, right? And I remember crying.
With your friends.
With my friends. And saying, how will I ever have this utopia, not recognizing that you really move into a different life, a more mature life, and all of a sudden other things replace what you thought were the most important things. But thank God I also had a wife who said, go to the verbringen.
Yes. Yes, thank God. You're quiet. Okay. So describe.
Hey guys.
All the grandkids are watching. Shai is in pajamas. Good job. Okay. So, so describe now becoming a Chabad Rabbi. You had to make a decision which was against what you had been raised. Your parents didn't want you becoming a rabbi. They wanted you to become a professional, be wealthy, successful.
Right.
So how did that time in 770 change what you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I'm going to say the idea of becoming a Chabad Rabbi was long before 770. That's the truth. Probably when I was about 16 years old, I was able to define and already tell my parents what I wanted to do. I've shared this story 1,001 times. It's another defining moment. You don't know it at the time, but it just is. I grew up amongst Hasidim, Montreal at the time, had many, many role models, people that were truly inspiring, people like Rabbi Peretz Samuchkin, people like Rabbi Morozov. I grew up in a town where, on some level, the shul on a Shabbos resembled what it must have looked like back in the old shtetl in Europe. And they were all holdovers from Europe. They were all European Hasidim. And my memory, and I don't know who said the story, and I've heard it multiple times, and maybe it took me many times for it to absorb.
To be hammered in like a nail, hammer the nail multiple times, right. Yes.
And the story is about the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. This is the late 1700s, and he lives in a 2-story home. He's living on the 2nd floor, and underneath him on the 1st floor is his son and future Rebbe, his successor. And his son is at the time sitting and learning Talmud, engrossed. And he was we say in Yiddish, a Kopmensch, a person who really was an intellectual giant, and he loved learning. That's all he wanted really to do. And he had a little baby, and one day the baby fell out of the vigila, which is an old-fashioned crib. You know, that it's really a cradle. It's really a cradle, not a crib. And the child fell out.
Today they call it a bassinet.
And he fell out of the crib, or the bassinet. I didn't know the word bassinet in those days. And he did not hear his own child crying. This is the grandchild of the old Rebbe who lives on the 2nd story. He did hear. He walked down, picked up the child, soothed the infant, walked over to his son, and hit him. In case you missed that, he hit him. And he said, if you're ever too busy with God to hear the cry of a Jewish child, then you are busier than God wants you to be. And I know you've heard that story from me.
I've heard that story from you 1,000 times. I didn't know that you consider that one of your defining stories of your life. I never knew that.
It is a defining story of my life. And I said to my parents, my father had a business, a very successful business. I won't say all the words I used by my parents because I don't know if you're allowed to repeat them in public. I'm being honest, by the way.
Although your parents are not going to be on Facebook and they're not going to see this.
Okay.
I should have posted on the family WhatsApp.
There's a bracha we say every single morning called Malbish Arumim, which is to clothe the naked. And I said, my parents were in the shmata business. I said, I don't want it. The highlight of my day should be when I say Malbish Arumim. Anyways, to make a very long story short, and it seeped into my consciousness. And I thought to myself, that's what I really want to do. I really want to make a difference in someone else's life. And I don't know if I ever shared this with you. I shared it with your mother. She was the first person I did share it with before we got married. And it was the first person I felt comfortable sharing it with. Your mother was not the first one I went out with. but I never felt comfortable enough to share my dream with anyone else. And that is, we grew up hearing stories about the Rebbe as a young child, envisioning and dreaming of a perfected world. I grew up, by the time I was 16, I had this dream of my own island. Did I ever tell you this?
Yes.
Okay. I had a dream of a little island, and it was going to be like a perfect little island. It was going to be, before they had SimCity and before they had all these, games, video games, already was in my head. And it was going to be like the perfect street. And the show was going to be here, and the Chabad house was going to be over there, and the school was going to be over here, and it was going to have a park, and it was going to be, and everything was just perfectly. And everybody would come there, would love each other, and there would be Ahavas Yisrael, and people would work together to better each other, not knowing that one day I would be able to start a community. But I already had that dream of creating something greater than myself that honestly would outlive myself. And I got that from that story and from all I heard from the Rebbe about being of service, doing something beyond yourself. I mean, in this country, not so long ago, in World War II, people were patriots because they gave up their lives for a cause greater than themselves. I know patriotism is not popular, it's passé, to say the least. But in my day, I was born in 1960. In my day, that was a popular, you remember 1960? No? My granddaughter doesn't remember 1960. You weren't!
Yeah.
And so it became, so it was the dream. And those days, not everybody went on shlichus. It was still fairly new. By the time I went on shlichus, there was, I don't know if there were even 300 shluchim in the world.
Now, the 300 couples in the whole world.
And that included Eretz Yisrael, and that included people that were in South America from the 50s and the 60s. And there wasn't even 5 shluchim really in Florida. I was, I think, the 6th shliach.
Yeah?
Yes.
Recorded 10 house, way best in. We leave him in.
Go on.
Fellow traveling?
No, it came much after me. Okay, I don't
Whatever,
want to...
anyway, okay.
And it was exciting. We were like the frontiersmen. We were going to break new ground, explore uncharted territory. And I grew up watching TV. And for those of you who remember Star Trek, and you remember the beginning of the Star Trek show, it talks about going to places where no one has ever gone. And in my head, I was the Hasidic Star Trek. We were going to go to uncharted territory and colonize, so to speak, brand new places to bring them into this orbit called Planet Chabad. And there was nothing I could imagine doing. I couldn't imagine that being a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or a shmatzah manufacturer could be as exciting as that. Nothing equaled the possibility of creating something out of scratch. And there was no one that was going to dissuade me.
You're not easily dissuaded, Chaim.
That is true.
Neither am I, but okay.
Okay.
Baruch Hashem.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
Did you and your mother say so many l'chaims when you
No,
did that interview?
no, we had no l'chaim with her.
No l'chaim?
No l'chaim with my mother. Okay. I don't know if I've ever said l'chaim with my mother. I ever said l'chaim with my mother.
You should.
I don't.
New experience.
3 years to l'chaim before. But that's part of the beauty of staying together. It says, it's Gimel Tammuz, sit and say l'chaim together.
Yes.
It's
Right.
This is much more warm and enjoyable than doing it over 2 different computer screens. I remember a farengim with your brother Shaya, where you were telling him, see, you can have money, financial issues, and I have financial issues, but at least I'm having the financial stress, not for my own business, but for the cause of spreading Judaism in the world.
How I ended up in Florida, by the way, is because I was a yeshiva student in Florida. I actually would come up to Inverary area. Okay,
so let me paint the frame for the next picture.
Let me paint the frame. Are you guys having a good time? Is this like better than a Zoom movie?
I don't know what a Zoom movie is. So everyone that wants, there was just actually a few weeks ago, there's a website, Tap into Coral Springs. Leon Fuchsman did a very, very nice write-up.
Yes, he did.
It was a beautiful article. I shared it on Facebook, Tap into Coral Springs. He does a weekly or a monthly write-up on the Coral Springs influencer. So I interviewed my father, very nice article. A few people that read it were also curious to know about. So how does it work? Everyone wants to know like the back end. How did you end up in Coral Springs? You could talk a little bit in general how the Rebbe sent emissaries out. This is going before Gimel Tammuz. Then specifically how you ended up here.
Okay,
and to all those that are watching, L'chaim, yes.
It's a very long story. I'm going to try to make it short. So before I came to Florida, South Florida, I looked at 3 different possibilities. One was a place called New Rochelle, just north of Yonkers. Everyone knows where that is. I looked at a place in Dallas, and I looked at South Florida. And I was not married very long, and I didn't want to stay in yeshiva and that kind of world. It was not for me sitting. And one of my good friends grabbed Dallas. Another friend grabbed New Rochelle. And so I was left with Florida. I was sitting in Kollel, and in those days, there wasn't a lot of people in Kollel, which is the yeshiva that you go to once you're married for a year. I was there for a couple of months at most. And I got an odd job offer to go to Wisconsin. I got a job offer to go to Buffalo. And I visited some of these places. I actually visited Buffalo. I was stuck there overnight in a snowstorm. I decided not going back to Buffalo.
Thank God.
Right. And there were 4 different, there was different places to look at and different job offers to look at.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second to clarify. The Rebbe didn't send people, with exceptions. Usually the Rebbe didn't tell anyone, go to Florida.
Right.
You had to, right, so explain. You had to find.
So shluchim, there was a shliach
when you had
in
an offer,
Wisconsin.
when you had a job offer.
There was a shliach of Chabad Rabbi in Wisconsin who said, thank God things are growing and I need to expand. I can't do it on my own. Let me get someone to help me. And he came into the kollel. There was these 30, 40 guys just recently married, all looking for job offers, or many of them looking for job offers to go on shlichus. Like I said, that was the most exciting thing on the planet in those days. And he walked over, and I guess he must have interviewed 1 or 2 people that he thought were possible. I'm sure he asked around who would be good for this job, if you were a teacher, if you wanted to go on campus. There was really no campuses in those days, but things like that. I had been a head counselor. I had gone a lot of places. I had been to Europe as a yeshiva student on Merker Shlichus. I used to go out to a lot of shluchim. So I got several job offers. I didn't look at them all, but there were 4 serious offers, serious enough that I decided that I should ask the Rebbe which one I should focus on. And in those days, if you got 2 or 3 or 4 offers, you actually wrote with your wife into the Rebbe, and you said to the Rebbe, you choose. I will go wherever you want. Now, you can give the Rebbe a little leeway, like tell the Rebbe, this is my first choice by putting it number 1, and this is my last choice, putting it number 4. And honestly, the job offer in Florida was to establish a Jewish day school. And I knew nothing about education. 0. One was to become a rabbi in a synagogue. One was different job offers. So I put all of those first. And I put the Florida offer last, even though Florida had been on my mind. What was being offered, that you should start a Jewish day school, just didn't sound appealing to me. What do I know about kids? Anyways, so the Rebbe had a very interesting knack. The Rebbe really doesn't answer by writing long letters. The Rebbe takes your question and turns them around. I'm sure you know that.
Explain, yeah.
So I'll give you an example. When a fellow called Jonathan Sachs was offered the job to become chief rabbi, he said, should I accept the offer of chief rabbi of England? The Rebbe just took the word should, the word I, and transposed them that I should accept the offer of chief rabbi. The Rebbe often used your own words to say, you already know the answer. So, very interesting that in my answer that I received the Rebbe underlined and circled option number 4, the words Meisat Chinuch, Jewish school or institution of education in Florida, South Florida, he wrote. I didn't write a city because I didn't know a city. And then in my letter, I had written a couple of other things. I'm not going to it's not relevant to the story. One of them, for instance, that was relevant. And I said, my wife and I, and the Rebbe circled the word wife and write Baska Masa, make sure that she's fully on board with the idea. And there was 2 other things that the Rebbe said. So the fellow who offered me the job offer, a fellow called Rabbi Lieberman, I called him up and I said, he knew that I was writing into the Rebbe. I got the answer, and it was very exciting. So it was Hanukkah time, and ostensibly we were going to move, my wife and I, Rivki and I, were going to move to.
It's an amazing story coming up.
Move to a city called Plantation, Florida, because there was a small group of people that actually knew Rabbi Lieberman and wanted to have a Shabbos minyan, just a Shabbos minyan. And this way I would have something to do on Shabbos and I could work the rest of the week on starting the school. I come to Florida on a Sunday of Hanukkah, and the person who meets me is a real estate agent, someone I still know. And she says, okay, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, and I'm going to help you find or look at apartments in Plantation. And I said, my first thing as a shliach is to find an apartment, and my first thing as a shliach is to find a Jew, not find an apartment. And by the way, that's really interesting. In 1948, right after World War II, there were many Jews who believed that in order for us to survive, we must restore a Jewish homeland, the land of Israel. And they said, no, I'm going to restore the Jewish people themselves. A huge difference about finding a piece of geography or finding a human being who lives on that geography. So I said to her, I'm not going to find a piece of geography. I'm not interested. I can do that tomorrow. It's not like I got to move there tonight anyways. And she didn't want to do. She didn't want to. I said, is there something Jewish happening? It's Sunday Hanukkah. And this was 1984. She said, there's a town called Coral Springs. I had never heard of Coral Springs before. And she said, there is a Hanukkah festival going on in a park, in a place called Mullins Park. And I said, take me there. And she said, what am I going to do with your luggage? And I said, who cares about my luggage? I don't know, keep in your trunk. So she said, I'm not hanging out. So she dropped us off, Rivki and I, she dropped your mother and I off at Mullins Park. There was no cell phones in those days. She said, how are you going to get home? I said, well, call a taxi. There was no Uber in those days. I couldn't have a phone to even to call. How you gonna? I said, no, I'll figure it out. You notice I figured it out. And I went and I said to people, are you Jewish? Would you like to put on tefillin? And it was a disaster because I couldn't get anyone to want to put on tefillin. Now, I had asked people my whole life, would you want to put on tefillin? I had a mitzvah route where I went every single week and developed relationships, but he was just cold calling, so to speak. I had never a mitzvah where I just went on the streets of Manhattan. I had a route that had been established by someone before me, people that were really ready and willing and to put on tefillin. Here I am in a brand new town. There's no Chabad here, and these people obviously had not heard of Chabad or just putting on tefillin. It wasn't like New York. And at one point, they really got frustrated. And I said, I'm not asking anyone anymore if they're Jewish, they want to put on film. And I started asking people, but after like an hour, I said, it's your lucky day. We're going to put on tefillin it's one of the things we do at the Hanukkah festival. And people, I guess, didn't know. I said, convincingly, like, okay. It's like, you got to buy a ticket. And I started putting on tefillin. And we put on tefillin with a lot of people. I want to say about 19 people. In the next 2 hours or so, and we said Shema Yisrael with people. And then everything started to wind down. And I didn't have a way of getting home or calling a taxi.
But I never heard this part of the story, yeah?
Taka didn't have a way of getting home. And there was a guy cleaning up.
Oh, everyone left.
Everyone's leaving. I was the last guy.
And the janitor's there.
And there was this elderly fellow there. Stan Kane. Do you remember that name? No. And he was the fellow that was the president of the Jewish coalition that had organized this Hanukkah festival. There was a couple hundred people that came, 200 people came, 250 people that came. And he was like so excited that all these 250 people came. Later on, when we take over the Hanukkah festival, we built up to a couple thousand people. But in those days, it was, the early years of Coral Springs, so to speak. And I walked over to him, and somehow I had missed him. He was, I guess, behind the scenes organizing. I said, it's your lucky day. And he didn't want to put on film. Even though he was the organizer. I said, what's your name? He said, Stan King. And I guess he thought I should know who he was. And
he was offended.
And I didn't know who he was. He said, who are you? I said, I'm the guy putting on tefillah with everybody. He says, I was called. You don't know? So I was called to put on tefillah with everybody. He says, not true, because I'm the one who organized it.
He called your bluff.
Called my bluff. He says, we didn't order some guy to put on tefillah.
It was on the entertainment.
So I said, you didn't? Are you sure? Because I especially came from New York. I thought I came from New York just today. He's looking at me like I dropped off Mars. You came to New York to buy the home? I said, I did. And we went back to his home. We called. He lived on Sample and Coral Springs Drive, which is 2 minutes by car from, and he took your wife and I. I think it only took us because your wife, your mother was harmless and innocent, not me. He didn't put on film that day. I got to put on film with him many, many times afterwards. And so I spent a year in Plantation, unsuccessfully really, trying to open up a school. When I saw it wouldn't go for many, many reasons. And one of the things is that nearby there was already an existing day school, David Posnack. I was here several weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I don't remember how long. And the Federation knew of my existence. Rabbi Lieberman had introduced me. They called me into a meeting. They said, if you haven't unpacked, go back to New York. And I know this happened to other Chabad rabbis in the 80s. It was common. Federations felt threatened at that time, I guess. And when I decided to start in a new place, because Plantation, it didn't seem, because in the city of Plantation is where the David Posnack was. So I said, okay, you know what, we'll move as far away as possible. I opened up a map and I saw a place called Coral Springs. And I said, well, I remember Coral Springs. And I went to Rabbi Korf and I said to Rabbi Korf, I have no money, but I still have a lot of dreams and I'd like to take Coral Springs, and no one else wanted it. There was a lot of cows in those days. I lived on Wiles and Coral Springs Drive. My neighbors were cows right across the street. And there was nothing built on Wiles. And that's how we started, and the rest, as they say, is history.
You had a place in there?
Yeah, that's a long story. I have to tell you that our first school was in our living room with 3 kids. And I remember going around trying to interest people, and someone coming to see the school. By then we had 4 kids or 5 kids or 6 kids. And he said, what kind of school is this? And I said, it was a line that we used for many years. I said, it's a very exclusive school. Everyone's trying to get in, but we only very select. And and everything else they say is history. And Baruch Hashem, today there's not just one school, the Hebrew Academy. There's 3 schools. There's a Mesivta, and there's a girls' high school, and so many Chabad houses.
Describe your first Shabbos in Coral Springs, or your first Shabbos that you had a shul in Coral Springs. I just want to clarify, so make sure the story is clear. When he moved to Florida with the Rebbe's blessings to open a school in Florida, he thought he was going to Plantation, but the first day that my parents were in Florida, they actually ended up in Coral Springs in Mullins Park. And obviously that was where they were meant to be, and they started where they belong.
Right.
Sometimes it takes time to realize that you're actually where you belong, and so you leave where you were started, not knowing that you were in the right place.
I wrote to the Rebbe that the first job offer was still available, and should I take it because it's not working out with the school? And the Rebbe, again, not really writing a long response, the Rebbe crossed out, the offer that was still available, and the Rebbe, it's not working out. The Rebbe crossed out not, and work it out. And the Rebbe said, "I gave you a shlichus." So I said, "Okay, I have to stay in Broward County and open up a day school."
That's a very interesting point, talking about the way the Rebbe operated. So, in the general sense, obviously exceptions to the rule, that wherever you are, that's where you're meant to be. Right. So you ended up in Coral Springs, and that's where you were meant to be. In general, that was the Rebbe's general approach. If you're in a place, then that's where you're meant to be. It's not 100%. You don't just give up and move away because it's not working out and because it's difficult. If you're there, obviously God feels you belong there. The Rebbe is trusting you there, and make it work.
My first Shabbos in Coral Springs. We moved into an apartment. We met our landlord, a fellow called Eliezer Mills, Larry Mills. And I had met a Jew who lived in Hollywood, who was a builder, who owned a university in Royal Palm, a plaza, a small plaza. His name was Sam Schechter, Shmuel Schechter, Olav HaShalom. And he owned the plaza, And he owned an office, a second-story office, a very small, tiny office that wasn't being used. It really wasn't like rentable or something. And I asked him if he would give me the office gratis for free. Bought some chairs, like 15 chairs. Borrowed a Sefer Torah. I took, if anyone remembers 25, 35 years ago, going to camp, had these big old-fashioned trunks. I took one of those trunks, I put it on its edge. I used that as a Sefer Torah holder, an ark. A little different than the ark that you're building right now. It didn't cost me any money. Just draped the talis over it. Borrowed a Sefer Torah from Rabbi Lieberman. Borrowed some Siddurim, borrowed some Chamashim, and called up the newspaper to put an ad. Really, with my last pennies, we had no, we really had no money. I don't mean we had little money. We had no money. And I said to him, okay, we're going to make a shallant. And Rivki, your mom, made a big shallant. And we were very excited because he put an ad in the local Coral Springs Forum, which was the only thing that existed in those days. And our apartment from the shul was 2.6 miles. We were on Wiles and Coral Springs Drive. This is on University and Royal Palm. I walked the 2.6 miles.
Mommy was pregnant at the time.
Yes, Mommy was pregnant.
Not with me. I was born before you moved here.
You were born? Yes, you were born while we're still
You're pregnant, Malfi.
You're younger than you look. So, walked the shul, and no one came.
Nobody.
Came back after I davened. I don't know what time it was.
No one talked during the sermon.
And I said to your mother, I said it was amazing. No one talked during the sermon. People were awestruck. And I said, okay, I got to find a Jew. And obviously, I realized just putting an ad in the paper was probably not going to work. So the only Jew I actually knew that lived in Coral Springs was my landlord, who belonged to a Reform temple.
I want to interrupt you for a second. The only Jew he knew was his landlord, meaning he moved, my parents moved, they didn't know anybody. Literally, the Chabad Star Trek,
right,
opening a brand new area.
And I walked over to Larry Mills. He lived a block away from me. And I said, Larry, come to Shul Shabbos. He says, Rabbi, I go to Shul, really just Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, an hour here, an hour there. I listen to Shofar. And I go to my parents in a Reform temple called Bat Yam out in Fort Lauderdale. And that's enough for me. And I said, no, you're going to love it. It's intimate. It's cozy. And I remember, I did really use the word intimate, I remember.
It's all in the marketing.
And I hacked him, and I hacked him, and I hacked him. I didn't say, would you like to go? I told him how wonderful it's going to be. And I hacked him, and he must have felt bad for me. And he said, okay, I'm going to go. What time should I pick you up? So I said, I'll pick you up. And so Shabbos, when I knocked on his door, and he was there, and because he only had gone to synagogue, or Shankipp, he was wearing a tie and a jacket and a suit. And he says, where's your car? So I said, Larry, I don't drive on Shabbos. He says, why not? I said, religious Jews don't drive on Shabbos. He said, come on, for real. And he had no idea. And I said, no, for real. He says, Rabbi, okay, I drive. I'll take you. I said, no, you're going to walk with me. Like I'm going to walk with you. He didn't really know where the shul was. It was on a plaza on University Drive. He didn't really. I said, you might want to lose the jacket. And we are walking, and we get to the university. He said, where is it? I said, it's really soon. And really soon. It's like when you go to Disney World, you think it's really soon. It's just around the corner. You get around the corner, and you realize there's 23 more corners. That's what I did. We kept on going around the corners. It's really just around the corner. When he finally got there, he was sweating buckets. He was miserable. And we finally got in, and it was just two people, now me and him. And he's waiting, and he said, where's everybody else? I said, Larry, you are in the fastest growing shul in Coral Springs. In 1 week, we doubled our attendance. We grew by 100%. And he was like really ticked off. And for 2 Shabbosim, I got him to come to shul. Okay. And we had a great time. We talked. Larry Mills is a very intelligent guy. He actually loved our conversations. But I knew, he said, I'm not coming back if you don't get someone else. And so the week number 3, I had to find someone else. And I literally started going throughout the week. I started going to offices on University Drive, knocking on people's doors. And that's how we met many of the people that I know over the course of time. And I got a second fellow, and then a third fellow, and then a fourth fellow. And slowly but slowly, and it took us about a year, maybe 10 months or so, 11 months or so, that we were able to get our first minyan. And then we had a fire.
Wow.
The place burned down, that part of the thing. And then we moved the shul. We rented another apartment right next to our apartment. And the apartment was used during the week for our little school, which by then already had 2 classes. And I used to, the Aron Kodesh was now built out a little PVC, and I would schlep in everyone else. So I'd take out the school furniture, put in and they had an olive-based train running across the room. And, so you looked at the Aron Kodesh that was behind it. And it was, and then we had a Sunday school. We started off Sunday school with Larry's 2 kids. And on the 3rd kid, and we made a camp and just started making activities and classes. And
that's how you started, knocking on office buildings in University Drive.
I also got an old list. It's from Tzivas Hashem that several years before had signed up for the first Sefer Torah.
Okay.
And again, there was no cell phones in those days. I got a printout of a list, and your mother and I just worked and called every single name. Literally, there was like 1,700 names. It was not broken down by zip code. It was just anyone in Broward County. We didn't know where they lived. And people were from Hollywood and coming to your shul or to your school or to your this or your camp. And there was very, very few people in Coral Springs. Very few people. But we just called people, knocked on doors. People didn't know Chabad today, obviously. When my son Yankee opened up here in the southwestern part of Coral Springs, Chabad, for many, is a known commodity. It's very, very different.
Locally and internationally.
Locally and certainly internationally, there's no question about it. Chabad has become so mainstream. When you think about it, in those days, we were the odd new guy on the street. Today, the only guys occupying the street, and I hate to say occupy the street, is Chabad. We're really the only presence in Coral Springs and in many other smaller towns, not big cities like a Chicago or in LA. Really, Chabad is the Jewish player that defines what Judaism is in town. They're the only guys that maybe have a mikveh, and maybe they're the only guys that have a Sunday school, and maybe they're the only guys that do adult education. Again, big cities, there's 100 organizations, but in small little suburbia, very often Chabad is the face of Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how all Chabad started. I started the same way, knocking. I had a list with knocking on doors with Chana's homemade challahs and going through Eagle Trade, going door to door.
So that's changed in some 35 years. We didn't give out challah, we gave out shalom. People come to the shul. The difference between shalom and a challah, of course, is that a challah is 10 times tastier. And a challah reminds them of Bubby. And a challah brings out all this nostalgia and warm memories. And shalom, they eat enough because it's like very addictive. They're stuck with you. And they can't move for the next week. And that's how you keep them. Did you know that, Chana? That's the trick.
Okay, so another question for you. As the Chabad Rabbi during the time before...
It's 9:02.
Okay, you go somewhere else next?
I do have a 9:30. I plan on going to Fabrengen tonight.
Okay. We'll finish it. I'm loving this. I'm sure everyone that's watching this, we're keeping the crowd
who's watching. Read what someone asked? What someone said?
You can read the comments.
It says, hello, Susan. My Ruvain, Rabbi Hillebrand, was the last bar mitzvah in Yossi's storefront. Wow. And Barry and I were the first wedding in Yankee Shul. Wow. Feeling so blessed to be a part of your growing community.
Anyone has any questions or any comments?
Ira Briskin says I should have called him. Ira, you weren't born.
You weren't born. He's going to like that comment. So describe what it's like being a Chabad Rabbi when the Rebbe is still actively, physically leading Chabad. When there were issues that came up, writing to the Rebbe, writing to the headquarters. What was the interaction of the Rebbe with?
I'll show you one story out of many.
I want personal, not.
I'm going to share with you one story. And it kind of encapsulates for me the relationship. This is already in 1992.
Okay.
The Rebbe was sick. The Rebbe was incapacitated.
After the stroke.
The Kinos HaShluchim, the gathering of Shluchim, was always a big event in our lives. When I first went to the first Kinos, it was not international. It was just national. It was just Americans. And there was 100 some people.
I have thousands, yeah.
And I knew everybody. And I was one of the young kids on the block. And then 2 years later, it became international. And because the Rebbe's condition, we all want to be as close as possible to the Rebbe and see the Rebbe. So they decided that instead of having this really fancy banquet, they're going to make the banquet in 770, downstairs in 770. And if you've ever been to 770, you know, there's these very long benches and there's these little tables. So instead of sitting around the large tables, round tables, you know, with a buffet and everything, they squeezed in all these people into 770, into these little narrow tables. There was no seating arrangements. I remember sitting next to a guy from France, a shliach from France. He didn't speak a word of English. And I speak un petit peu. I speak like 2 words of French.
Yeah.
And at one point, the highlight, we were all expecting or hoping, I should say, really, for the Rebbe to come out. And they had built this little balcony in the back of 770 overlooking the main sanctuary. And it was covered usually by a curtain. And at some point, we got very little notice, a couple of minutes notice, that the Rebbe was going to come out. And the place just erupted in song. And there's this guy speaking only French on one side. I don't remember who's on the other side. And we were just jumping. There was such energy in the room. And at some point, a couple of minutes later, the curtain opened, and it was impossible to imagine that the roar just got louder. We were screaming at the top of our lungs, trying that with our will alone, we should bring the Rebbe out. And when the Rebbe came, it just, whatever the roar was before and the excitement was before, paled, it like trebled, it quadrupled. I mean, it was electric. And the Rebbe encouraged the dancing and the singing.
This guy, the Rebbe was in a wheelchair, but he was on the balcony,
right.
Over the curtains you could see.
And I spoke to many people subsequent to that event later on in the evening. There was no doubt in anyone's mind, that the Rebbe was about to stand up from his wheelchair and the Rebbe to say, the eagles are parked outside. Get onto an eagle. Other eagles will go pick up your families in Coral Springs or Johannesburg or wherever your family is. And there was no question in my mind, not a doubt, not a 1% possibility that Mashiach was not going to be announced at that very moment, because I felt that the entire energy of the world is in that room. And it was because of the Rebbe's presence. I remember writing a duch. A duch means a din v'cheshbon, like a reckoning and accounting into the Rebbe, and feeling bad that I didn't get an answer.
Yeah, but that's...
No, another time, my early years. And I want the Rebbe to say thank you. I want the Rebbe to say, good job. But like when you're married 5 years, you want your wife to say, that was really funny. And when you're married 35 years, you don't really care if she says you're funny. Khan, it's coming. And now I'm just happy to write into the Rebbe. I have to say something. I know we've gone an hour. There really were 2 things I wanted to say.
Go ahead.
Completely different topics, if you don't mind. And I just need to share with them. One is from the fact this week's Torah portion is called Korach. And besides that troublemaker Korach, there are 2 other troublemakers. In Hebrew, they're called Dasan and Aviram, and they have a history spanning decades of making Moshe Rabbeinu's life, the life of Moses, the life of the Rebbe, miserable. They were the ones who curried favor with the Pharaoh in Egypt when Moses was still a prince, of trying to get Moshe Rabbeinu killed. They have done everything they can throughout Moshe Rabbeinu's career to make him fail. They have argued against Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership. They have argued we got to go back to Egypt, get rid of Moshe. They call him a murderer. And at the end of their lives, when God already has sealed their fate and says they're going to die, Vayakam Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu gets up and he goes over to them. And I bet you there were people, his Chassidim, Moshe Rabbeinu had Chassidim, who said to Rebbe, don't you have any dignity? Don't you have any self-pride? You're going to lower yourself to these cretins, to these no-goodniks, to these troublemakers. And the reason why I share this story is because throughout my career, not so much today, when Chabad is, as you said, a known commodity, but in my first 10 years of shlichus, when we were just getting to be known, people made very negative comments about the Rebbe, very negative comments about Chabad Lubavitch, very negative comments about what we were trying to do, many negative comments about the idea of trying to make a frum day school when no one needs you. I never experienced what Moshe Rabbeinu experienced or what the Rebbe experienced. But I always thought to myself, if Dasan and Aviram had an inkling of how much their Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, loved them, they would have bit their tongue. There was a rabbi who wrote into the Rebbe an apology note, because he had been one of those people that had blasted Lubavitch. The Rebbe was dangerous, he said.
Yeah, South Florida.
You're in Florida.
No, I think it's yeah.
And he said to the Rebbe an apology later, I apologize, I hope the Rebbe doesn't have a grudge. And the Rebbe wrote him back, I don't have time to hold grudges. If people knew how much the Rebbe loved them, they would say, that's the kind of leaders that we need. Not leaders who are self-serving or who want for themselves, who truly are motivated by love. And the reason why you love your wife and you love your children is the more you feel your life or your spouse loving you, the more you love in return. I think what motivates us is that we feel the Rebbe's care, we feel the Rebbe's concern, and we feel the Rebbe's love for us. That's one thing I wanted to really talk about, the Rebbe's leadership. And we talk about how the Rebbe didn't want followers. No one wants his spouse to follow him or her. You want someone who walks beside you, who sometimes leads you and sometimes guides you and sometimes inspires you. And we can go into a whole thing about v'yichoi lecha, this relationship between a chassid and a Rebbe. And I'm going to share a chassidic insight from a Jew called Isaac Humler, who said that even though Kabbalistically the definition of a Rebbe is someone who has a general soul, in Hebrew a neshama calls, his soul encompasses the souls of everyone in his generation. And obviously there are some souls that are super souls who encompass not just the soul of their generation, every generation. The most obvious example would be Adam, the first person in the world. Isaac Humler, this old chassid in the days of the Alter Rebbe, said, Adam Harishon, Adam was not a Rebbe. You know why? Because he had no Chassidim. And had he had Chassidim, he wouldn't have sinned. There's a reciprocal relationship between a Rebbe and a Chassid. And if you don't mind, I'm going to turn this interview around. I'm going to ask you a question.
Told you you're dangerous, yeah.
What is the one thing that parents, if they had half a brain, would ask God for concerning their children? You say, God, if you would give me this, that would be the greatest blessing of all. What do we want? What's the greatest blessing via our children?
After health, they should be happy and successful and be who they're meant to be. Yeah.
Your rabbi failed.
After health. First of all, health.
Wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong, and don't say nachas and don't say anything else. Everyone answers what you answered. And I want to tell you something, when you're going to get to be my age, and God willing, you will get there, you're going to have a different answer. Okay. The answer is you wish you would be a more effective parent. the greatest reward would be for me if all the times I messed up, I hadn't messed up. If all the times I needed to be inspiring, I could be more inspiring. All the stupid or silly or petty things I said, or the cynical things I said throughout my life, I wish I hadn't said them. The greatest blessing would be if I should be a better parent. And automatically my kids would be better kids. In that mimer that, I'm sure it's another discussion, our Rebbe says, you know what the greatest bracha we can give the Rebbe is? When we show the Rebbe that he's a better Rebbe, a more effective Rebbe. We do that when we are better Hasidim. That's this relationship between a Rebbe and a Chassid. And it's because of the Rebbe's leadership style. He didn't lord it over anybody. He didn't demand of anybody. He didn't tell us what to do. And which brings me to the legacy of the Rebbe. The Rebbe has no legacy in the traditional sense. And he left us a series of marching orders. And we hear the Rebbe tell us to do this or go put on film or make a class. I don't believe that. The Rebbe was the kind of leader who became such part of our consciousness that he doesn't have to make any demands of us anymore. We now demand it of ourselves. Gimel Tammuz, and this I want to wrap up with, unless you want to ask another question. Gimel Tammuz, if it's going to be meaningful, you're going to move from the question, what does the Rebbe want from me? You're going to move to the question is, what do I want from me? And a chassid, when he asks the same question as his Rebbe, when your child asks the same question as the parent, and you don't have to ask the question anymore. Will you clean up your room? Will you do your homework? Will you be a good boy? Will you eat like a mensch? When the child starts to ask the question and demand those questions and those answers from themselves, then the parent can say, I was a good parent. Gimel Tammuz, really, for me, is to stop saying, what does the Rebbe want from me? Did you grow up after 26 years, and what do I want from me? That's the Rebbe's legacy, that we should demand it of ourselves. Okay?
L'chaim, thank you very, very much. God to bless you with a lot of nachas.
First of all,
yes,
it's a pleasure to see my grandchildren again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for watching.
Yes, we should have many more opportunities.
Amen.
More, thank you everyone for watching, and be in touch for good things. Stay tuned.